Hello and welcome to Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast from the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm Steve Bland, and this is the podcast that is a bit of a how-to guide to help you overcome common myths, fears and barriers to cancer prevention, diagnosis, treatment and care. Now in this episode we're standing up to prostate cancer. We're going to give you a bit of an idiot's guide. I'll be the idiot. A bit of an idiot's guide to prostate cancer. My guest today, Susan Piper, is a specialist nurse at Prostate Cancer UK. Hello, Susan.
Hello.
And we've also got making his podcast debut. He normally sits to my left when we record these podcasts and tells me and tells Femi the things that we shouldn't say. Paul Thomas is the communications and engagement manager at the Alliance. Hello, Paul.
Morning, Steve.
How you
Feels
doing?
strange to be sitting in this side of the chair.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at you rather than seeing you make notes to my left on things that we need to re-record. But yeah, great to have you along. And I think it's really important to talk about some of the work that's going on in the Alliance in terms of prostate cancer. But I want to start with you, Susan, because I'd like to take this back to fairly basic levels. I've had a few conversations around prostate cancer, but I don't think I really know too much about it. So I'm hoping to come out of this in the next 45 minutes feeling a bit more educated, and I hope people listening will feel the same. Let's start really basic. What is a prostate and what is prostate cancer?
Well, you're not alone. We know that around half of men asked don't actually know where the prostate is or what it does. So I think it might be helpful just to say that only men have prostates, and those who are assigned male sex at birth will have a prostate, but also trans women. So even if they've had gender affirming surgery, they will still have a prostate despite that. But the prostate is actually a gland, and its main function is that it produces most of the fluid that make up semen. So it's actually part of the male reproductive system. And it's found just below the bladder and just in front of the rectum, just in front of the back passage. Prostate cancer is only one of the conditions that can affect the prostate. But what can happen is that the DNA can be affected in prostate cells. We don't quite understand exactly why this happens, but this means that these cells start to multiply more quickly and chaotically, and this will eventually lead to development of a tumour with the ability in some men to be able to spread to surrounding areas or to other parts of the body.
How common is prostate cancer? Because I know, we'll get into a bit of this in terms of the work the Alliance does. I know it's a lot more common in black men, for example, but how common kind of broadly is prostate cancer? Well,
prostate cancer is actually the most commonly diagnosed cancer in men in the UK. And so on average, 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed. And you're absolutely right. Black men are at double the increased risk, with around 1 in 4 men being diagnosed. So it is a significant problem, a significant diagnosis. And we know that there are certain men that will be at increased risk, but it's important to say that the biggest risk factor is increasing age. So prostate cancer is most commonly diagnosed in men over the age of 50, but the older a man becomes, the more likely they are to be diagnosed with prostate cancer. Another risk factor is having a family history, and this would really be the case in men who have a first-line relative with prostate cancer, so that might be a father or a brother, and those men can have 2.5 times the risk of being diagnosed as compared to a man with no such family history. And then just to sort of talk about ethnicity, and that it would be black men who are of an Afro-Caribbean or African origin. As we've said, we have double the increased risk of being diagnosed. And another very important thing to mention is that black men can be diagnosed a little bit earlier, so perhaps in their mid-40s, and can also be more likely to be diagnosed with faster-growing disease, which we call aggressive growing disease, and more likely to be diagnosed with advanced disease.
Going back to the 1 in 4 black men who might get prostate cancer, do we know why that is?
No, we don't fully understand why that is. We think that it's likely to be connected to genes handed down from parents, and this is why we are part funding some very important research called the Profile Study, and the researchers are examining the genes of men of black ethnicity to see if they can try and understand why this might be, and if they can do this, then they'd be able to use this potentially as a potential screening tool for the future. So we do need more black men to come forward to join this study. So if there's anybody who's listening who's between the age of 40 and 69 of black ethnicity, and that would need to be both parents and or for grandparents, then please feel free to look on the prostatecanceruk.org website or give us a call, and we'd be very happy to give you the contact details for an informal chat.
Paul, what a tricky cancer for you guys to think about when it comes to the work that the Alliance does, because obviously we know, we've talked about it before, the incredibly diverse population in terms of ethnicity in North East London. So how do you go about, it must be a vast job to try and educate all the different groups that you've got about prostate cancer, given that many of them will have an increased risk.
It's a huge job, yeah. As Susan said, it's the most common cancer in men in the UK. And as you said, Steve, we've got a very diverse population and a very deprived population as well in North East London. And also we have the fact that we know that men are often traditionally reluctant to come forward to get support. So if they spot signs or symptoms, they won't go and see their GP. So we've got all of these kind of different factors at play. But we're starting to make some progress in this. We've got quite a lot of campaigns going on at the moment around prostate cancer. So one of our approaches is to work with local football teams, sports clubs. So we partnered with Leyton Orient and we did some sessions with them. We've fairly recently sponsored Hackney Wick FC's youth team. Through the title of the campaign is It's Not a Game. And so it's linking in with sport to raise awareness of prostate cancer and the other cancers as well that are common in men, so stomach, bowel, lung. So that It's Not a Game is on the shirts of Hackney Wick FC
That's
youth
fab.
team. And it's not just reaching the players, but also the families that come along to watch the game. It's getting those conversations going. So it's something that maybe people don't talk about so much traditionally. So we're trying to get people to talk about it, to become more aware, particularly some of the risks that Susan was talking through, the family history, and it being more common in black men as well. And actually, I've got a question I wanted to ask Susan, if that's okay. So I was just interested from your experience, those key facts that we started off talking about. So what a prostate is, that it's only in men, that it's the highest cancer in the UK and the risks. How much of that is widely known, do you think, in your experience, or is there a long way to go to actually get these facts well known?
Yeah, I think that awareness of prostate cancer has improved in more recent years, and this has been predominantly due to a diagnosis of some very well-known celebrities such as Stephen Fry and Bill Turnbull, for example, which resulted in significant increase in individuals wanting to find out more about prostate cancer, it had a phenomenal effect on the contacts, certainly to the service that myself and my colleagues provide. We need to do a lot more to raise awareness because we are aware, we did a survey in 2020 and significant numbers of men were unaware of those risk factors, which is so important to know. And it's particularly important to know what your risk factors are, or if you happen to fall into a high risk group, because actually it's very important to highlight that in early prostate cancer, we don't expect symptoms. So to understand your risk is even more important because you may not have anything to indicate that
that's
there's a
really
problem.
interesting, isn't it? Because you know so many cancers we talk about symptoms, breast cancer, we sort of know what to look for. Same with many cancers, and I think that's the common thing that I've found when you talk about prostate cancer, that people don't know what to look for, and actually, when there is something in terms of a symptom, it's often because the cancer has grown to a certain size. It's putting pressure on something else, isn't it? And it's it's more advanced maybe when you actually get a symptom.
That can be the case, but I have to be honest with you that it is common for men to experience urinary problems, especially as they get sort of to middle age and onwards from there. And there are many conditions.
I noticed you looking at me there, Susan, when you talked about getting to middle age.
No, wasn't insinuating anything.
Wasn't looking at me, Paul. She was. She turned her head there.
So urinary symptoms are incredibly common as a man becomes older, and very often they are due to sort of non-cancerous benign prostate conditions and problems. But it's very important that men never ignore these symptoms if they're experiencing them. And we would absolutely encourage all men to see their GP or their nurse practitioner if they're experiencing symptoms, because although it is more likely to be due to a benign condition, you absolutely need to rule out the possibility of a cancer that had become more advanced. But it's also important to say that men don't always have symptoms, even when they have advanced disease, which I must just say, advanced disease is prostate cancer that's spread to other areas of the body. Yeah. So, it's important not to ignore symptoms, but also to understand that it could be due to a benign non-cancerous condition such as enlargement of the prostate, which becomes increasingly common as a man ages.
I think that's a key thing that you said about not having symptoms, because it means then as a guy, in terms of prostate cancer, you have to be proactive. So rather than wait around for symptoms, you have to understand your risk. You have to understand your family history.
Absolutely that.
So my dad had prostate cancer and my granddad had prostate cancer. Oh. So I know that there's a good chance at some point, and I was joking, when you talked about middle age, but I turned 50 this year.
Never, Paul. I wouldn't have guessed.
I was waiting for you to say no, Paul. Surely not.
No chance.
But so I know that I've kind of increased my risk by age and family history factors. So I saw my GP earlier on this year. I talked through that family history and risk, and had my PSA test, and he suggested going every year for that, so that you can look at and see if it's a change. But I'm not going to get a notification about it. I won't get a call to say, come in for your PSA.
Would you not, even when you turn 50, would you not get?
I had to have that conversation with the GP and ask for it. And next year, when it's going to be about a year since my last one, I'll need to make that call. And the GP said I could do it through the online form and just put a note in there to say that I'm at risk of prostate cancer. Please can I have a PSA test. So hopefully that will mean I won't even need to go in and have an appointment. I can just get the form and have my blood test. But I won't get any reminders. I have to be proactive. So it is about, the whole title of the podcast series is Taking Control of Cancer. So it's things that you can do yourselves. And I think that's a key thing. If you want to get a key message out to people out there, is to look at your risk of prostate cancer and then do something about it. So if you are a high risk, then it's worth monitoring, speaking to your GP, getting the tests that you can, and then looking out for the symptoms that may develop, as Susan was talking about.
The age you can get PSA test is actually something I want to come back to. I want to just explore just quickly, Susan, if you could explain what a PSA test is and what it does.
Yes, certainly. And just before I do, I just wanted to mention that to help men understand their risk, we developed a 30-second online interactive risk checker, which can be found on the Prostate Cancer UK website. And
what's the website? Give it a little shout out.
So it's prostatecanceruk.org.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic website with lots and lots of information with all the medical jargon removed. So it's a very comfortable read. The risk checker can also be found by simply searching on any search engine platform, prostate cancer, if you can't remember, Prostate Cancer UK risk, and you'll see the risk checker. And individuals will be asked to enter their age, their ethnicity, and their family history, and will immediately be able to see if they fall into a high-risk category. And then it goes on to give them more information about the next steps, about the possibility of considering testing. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that quickly,
that's
if that's
important,
okay.
Because I think that's really important, because I think we spoke to Kevin, I think, didn't we, in one of the earlier episodes of this?
Did, yeah.
And he said that he knew there was a family history, I think, I'm right in saying, but he didn't realise there was a link.
Well, his family history wasn't prostate cancer, though. I think his family history was breast cancer.
I think
He didn't. I didn't realise that until Kevin talked about it at the podcast.
Yeah, he didn't realise there were other cancers that were linked to prostate cancer in terms of a family history.
Increase the risk of prostate cancer, yeah.
So sorry, just get back to your original question about PSA testing. So the best first test to look for prostate cancer at this moment in time is the PSA blood test, and that stands for prostate-specific antigen. And this is something that's produced by healthy prostate cells, but also by cancer cells. So all men would have a low level of PSA circulating in their blood, but the majority of men with prostate cancer will have raised levels. It's important to highlight the fact that if a man has a raised PSA level, that it doesn't automatically mean that they have prostate cancer, but it's very, very helpful in understanding if that man would benefit from undergoing further investigations. And the key thing is that we need to be able to rule out prostate cancer as the cause for that raised PSA, because PSAs can be raised by non-cancerous conditions such as enlargement, as I mentioned earlier, or infection, or inflammation of the prostate. So it's the first step, and unfortunately there is no one test to be able to look for prostate cancer.
And just explain, because I know there's been a lot in the press recently. We're recording this in November 2024. Chris Hoy, the cyclist, was diagnosed some time ago, but he talked about it quite recently. And one of his big things, he's 48 when he was diagnosed, I think, and he was talking about the age of screening. It's not routinely offered to men under 50 without symptoms or a family history, is it? But over 50, you can get one?
Well, actually, just to clarify, there is no national screening programme for prostate cancer.
Okay.
So, as you mentioned, it would really be only if a man themselves approached the GP who was concerned about their risk. And the current guidelines are that any man from age 50 is entitled to request this test free on the NHS through either their GP or their nurse practitioner. We, Prostate Cancer UK, when I say we actually encourage men who have a family history, particularly those such as yourself with a first-line family history, and men of black ethnicity, have this conversation from age 45. Now, this isn't in the national guidance, but we feel it's so important as these men are at greater risk of being diagnosed, and perhaps greater risk, as we mentioned earlier, about black men might be diagnosed a little bit earlier with faster growing disease. We recommend that men from age 45 in these high-risk groups have these conversations. So just slightly earlier than you did so, but you still did one a little bit late. Absolutely. And then, the individual risk of that man can be considered along with the GP. And just to say that, we understand our healthcare professionals working in the NHS are really up against things at the moment, but still trying to do an amazing job. But it's very important that if a man approaches a GP and the GP perhaps didn't have that awareness, because it can sometimes be the case that a black man's at greater risk, etc., or the degree of concern about a man having more than one first-line relative diagnosed, it's really important that the GP is aware that Prostate Cancer UK have teaching opportunities and support educational opportunities for healthcare professionals as well. And we have a PSA consensus where we had a group of experts, leading experts, come together to really decide how we can manage men who have a high risk in the interim period before we're able to develop a national screening programme. But it's very important to say that if the man isn't proactive, then nobody's going to call them in to have a PSA done.
Okay, so if I'm 44, my grandmother on my mum's side died from breast cancer. Would that count as high risk? What would be high risk?
No, I think that when we consider other cancers that might make a man at high risk of prostate cancer, I think really what we'd be looking at here more so, it would be more relevant if it were to be a first-line relative with prostate cancer or more than one, a strong family history of prostate cancer. But I think if a man had a first-line relative or with breast cancer or ovarian cancer, thinking about perhaps carrying the 40 BRCA gene, which is quite rare, but carrying the BRCA2 gene 40 BRCA2 does mean that men are at increased risk of prostate cancer. And those men should also, if they have a confirmed carrier history of themselves, that they should be speaking to the GP from 45. But I think in relation to breast cancer, if it was a grandmother and that relative was diagnosed at a slightly older age, there wouldn't be quite so much of a concern about increased risk of prostate cancer. Okay. But I think you have to look at the numbers of relatives diagnosed. So we're looking for a strong family history of particularly breast or ovarian cancer. Near relatives, the closer the relative, probably the greater the risk. And also if that relative was diagnosed at a particularly young age. So men who have a first-time relative who've been diagnosed with prostate cancer, if that relative were to be diagnosed below the age of 60, that may also increase their individual risk.
So if, sorry, I'm just chucking some hypotheticals at you.
Sure.
So if Paul and the Alliance had done this campaign with Leyton Orient would have a lot of players in their 20s and 30s. Is somebody in their 30s, given that the test is only really available to over 50s, unless there are other circumstances, they'd probably be forgiven for thinking, this isn't a condition that's going to affect me until I'm in my 50s at least. Why is the screening, why is the test, if it is, quite a good test, why is it not just available to everybody?
Well, it has its limitations, though, and we absolutely appreciate that at Prostate Cancer UK. But there are some cautions in thinking about doing PSA tests on younger men. I mean, it's absolutely true that prostate cancer diagnosed below the age of 50 is actually uncommon. Unfortunately, with any cancer, it is possible for somebody to be diagnosed unusually young, but below 45 is extremely rare in actual fact. But we need to be a little bit more cautious with black men. But there are other concerns too. We don't have any evidence to suggest that doing regular PSAs in younger cohorts of men would actually reduce prostate cancer mortality, so deaths as a result directly from prostate cancer. And there are other considerations, such as when a man is younger, they tend to have a much smaller prostate. So if you do a scan on a man's prostate that is supposedly healthy or it's small and they're younger, that prostate image can be quite dense and be quite difficult to assess, and that could lead to men having unnecessary further investigations and tests which could make them at risk of harm from that alone. So it's very unlikely to be diagnosed at early age. So if you think about the other screening programs that we have, they tend to start sort of slightly older age group, and that's because it's deemed to be evidence to show the best benefit.
Yeah, a good example is the Targeted Lung Health Check program, which is a fairly new national program, which is a free scan of the lungs for 55 to 74-year-olds who have ever smoked. And we get asked that quite a lot, why that age range.
We talked the other week, didn't we, to Steph? I asked her the same question, why could that not be in younger people? Yeah.
And it's because that's the age where it's going to have the biggest impacts and kind of diagnose the most cancers at an early stage, and it's doing its job. I mean, the Targeted Lung Health Check program, I think we're diagnosing around 65%, say on average, of cancers at stage 1 or 2, compared to around 30% before the program was introduced. So it's made a massive impact, and of course, as you said, Susan, earlier, it's diagnosed, the easier it is to treat.
No, absolutely. And, I always think of prostate cancer as not being one disease. It's quite a complex condition because there will be some men, if they're diagnosed with prostate cancer, I should say, is most commonly diagnosed as a very slow-growing disease. So that means that some men won't ever require treatment if they're diagnosed with all slow-growing prostate cancer contained within the prostate. But that is not the situation for a man, and it's a much smaller percentage, but they absolutely still do exist. And it's those men we need to find, those men who have a faster growing prostate cancer. And so that has the greater potential to do them harm and the ability to shorten their life. So we need to find that early so that it can be treated before it's had a chance to leave the prostate or cause further harm.
We've got a great example of that actually through one of our campaigns. So I mentioned It's Not a Game campaign linking with sports. We did an advertising campaign on Facebook, And actually, what part of the campaign wasn't just targeting men; it was targeting their partners, their families, their friends, their loved ones. And we found that because as part of the campaign, you could order a PSA kit online, and it was this guy's wife who ordered it. So he came home from work, and his wife and kids were waiting, saying, "We've got something for you. We've got a present." He's like, "Oh, what is it?" It's a PSA test.
Yes, yes.
And he did the PSA test. It was just a little prick on the finger, seeing off the blood sample, and it came back with cause for concern. And he went and had a biopsy, and they found a tumour there. So he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I think it was falling into the category you mentioned that was spreading at risk. And he went in for treatment, and it was completely removed, and he's now fully recovered. And his line, we did a great interview with him, lovely couple, Sean and Jeanette, and his line was, "That little kit thing saved my life."
Yeah, but it's so interesting, isn't it? You know, we as men, we're a frustrating bunch, aren't we? We don't like talking about these kind of things, do we? And I think it does need it often. I've heard many cases like that where somebody else has forced a man to the GP or ordered a test, and I think it is a really tricky thing to get through to men on a cancer like this.
It is, I agree. I've got my parents to thank, I guess, because I mentioned my family history of prostate cancer, but I get commonly asked both by my mum and my dad, have you had your PSA test? When's your next one due? Are you going to go and book it? So they're constantly reminding me. I said, I won't get a reminder from my GP, but I get a reminder from my parents, even at the age of 50, as they're still, making sure I'm doing the right thing.
We've talked about this on in regard to other cancers, but the one of the frustrating things, I guess, maybe for you guys, is the treatments are becoming so incredible now, aren't they, for prostate cancer? We were lucky enough in my other BBC life to go and record in theatre where at the Marsden, when one of the surgeons was using the Da Vinci machine on a patient, and we stood next to the patient while he was having this operation, and the surgeon was doing it on his little console like a video game. And I found it just extraordinary to think the way technology has gone, but then that requires people getting into the system in the first place, doesn't it? And actually having the test in the first place and finding the cancer in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, if you look at all the common cancers, if treatment is indicated in a man with prostate cancer, it's actually one of the most treatable of all the common cancers, if not the most treatable, if found in time. Yeah. And it's important to get a balance, though. When a man is diagnosed, if treatment is recommended, they're very often given a choice of treatment options. And that's where myself and my team very much come into their own, because we have the time to be able to support men, to provide reliable information to help them make a decision that feels right for them. Because you can imagine, you're diagnosed with prostate cancer, and then you're told to make a choice very often of a treatment option. And
we don't like choices. We like to be told what to do.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to health.
I like to be told what. But no, but I think it's, I joke, but it is one of my frustrations when my first wife was undergoing her treatment was getting choices. I hated it. I was like, you're the experts. You tell us what to do.
Absolutely.
So what's the best advice, Susan, for someone that's been diagnosed with prostate cancer and is looking at treatment options? Would they give you a call? Would they have an appointment with you, or what's the?
So we don't do any face-to-face appointments, but our service runs from Monday to Friday, and staffed by all qualified nurses of various backgrounds, mostly oncology, urology, palliative care. So fantastic range of very experienced nurses. Most of the contacts that we have are by phone. It's always lovely to be able to have a chat with somebody, isn't it? But for those who perhaps aren't ready to talk, we do have other platforms that people can contact us. So that's WhatsApp, live chat, email, and we will talk to individuals who have been affected by anybody whose life's been affected by prostate cancer diagnosis. So it might necessarily not only be that man, might be their partner or somebody else within the family. And we're able to provide reliable information and offer support to help them really try and navigate the complexities of being diagnosed and the next steps. And yes, treatment option discussions can be some of the longer calls, because, we all know what pressure the NHS is under, and they have time-limited appointments. And so it's incredibly difficult. Not only is the individual and their loved ones trying to deal with the cancer diagnosis, but then, as you say, to try and consider what treatment option when emotionally, psychologically, you're distraught. Absolutely, we can really help individuals talk through those treatment options. And the most important thing is, I think, to help them understand their presenting diagnosis, because the treatment will be recommended according to that cancer presentation. As I mentioned earlier, can be quite different. So the significance of diagnosis can be quite different for that man.
Yeah, well, thankfully my dad had a really positive experience of his treatment with the NHS.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
He was diagnosed in his early 60s, and
Yes.
he had his treatment. He's now 74.
Oh, fantastic.
And he's being kind of monitored. He goes every 3 months, 3 to 6 months, I think.
Yes.
And if it has gone up a bit, then he has to go back sort of more quickly for a consultation. But
Certainly.
I think what really stood out in terms of my dad's treatment was not just the actual treatment itself, but the follow-up care and support. So the actual monitoring, speaking to a consultant, having a kind of your PSA monitored. And that's been going on ever since. So very
absolutely.
thankful.
That's great. We touched on it a little earlier, actually, the impact of well-known faces talking about all cancers, really, but specifically prostate cancer. I mentioned Chris Hoy, and I was looking at some NHS stats earlier. In the 48 hours after he revealed his diagnosis, there were 14,478 visits to the NHS page looking at prostate cancer symptoms, compared to just under 2,000 the previous week before that. It shows, doesn't it, Susan, the impact of I imagine not just people like Chris Hoy talking, but generally people talking about, friends asking their mates if they know about it. Somebody like Paul, who's got a family history, telling people that perhaps haven't got that knowledge or haven't got that family history.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something that we've been working on at Prostate Cancer UK, how we can encourage just everyday people to talk to their family group, their friend group, if they feel comfortable, about spreading information which is reliable. We were inundated since Sir Chris Hoy deciding to share his diagnosis with the wider public, which is so generous of him. Undoubtedly, this will increase the numbers of men who are looking at their own risk, and we had significant thousands and thousands more clicks on our risk checker and calls to our services as well. And what I do find, though, is once men get through that initial barrier of not wanting to talk about their health and talk to someone like one of the nurses that I work with, actually then it's surprising. It seems to be a lot easier after that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I can believe that. I think it's a thing that I've talked about quite a bit. I think, I've said it in this podcast, I think there's, we do say a lot that men don't like to talk, but I think it's just we talk in a slightly different way. And I think once you open that door, then we're off and away. It's just that initial thing. It's probably not in the same way as maybe women like to talk about their health.
Yeah, I would agree. But, it's so satisfying when we're working and talking to somebody that might be talking to us for the first time about how they're feeling about their risk or their health, or talking about, more intimate things as well in relation to treatment side effects. That's another side of it we've not really touched on, but that's a very important side of things that we have a lot of calls about as well, is living with and beyond. I mean, there's over 400,000 men living with and beyond prostate cancer treatment, and those men also need support.
So let's take it on a little bit. I'm in my 50s, but whatever age, I've had a PSA test. I'm found to have a high risk. What happens then? Or the PSA test has found something that needs further examination. What happens then?
So there are guidelines in relation to men who have no symptoms, who have a PSA test, and if that's breached certain levels, then normally that man would be referred onto what we call the diagnostic pathway for a 2-week wait appointment with urology. And since 2019, an additional step was introduced to this diagnostic pathway, and that is that men would have what's called an MP-MRI, and this has been rolled out to most of the UK. And this is an important step because previous to this, men used to go straight to biopsy after being found to have a high PSA. And as I've mentioned, it doesn't automatically mean that man has prostate cancer. So on the whole, most men would either be sent an appointment for an MP-MRI within 2 weeks, or they would have a consultation within 2 weeks. And the MP-MRI enables the expert to look at the prostate and the area just outside the prostate in more detail, and they're looking for any unusual or suspicious areas. Now, this is important because it's only if they see any unusual areas that those men would be recommended to go to the next step, which would be a biopsy. Now, that's an important step, though, because it's the only way that we have currently to be able to understand what those unusual areas are that we've seen are due to. And if cancer cells are found, it also tells them the speed of growth of those cancer cells. So it's a step-by-step process.
Just share, just coming to my head, a funny story. I know I've talked about my dad a lot, but it's my kind of personal experience of prostate cancer.
Absolutely.
He went for one of his checkups, and I think he had a scan because his PSA was slightly higher than usual. And he was having this consultation, and you could see his scan results on the screen, and the clinician was showing to him. And my dad started to panic. Oh my God, what's that big white blob on my scan?
Yeah.
Turned out to be the cursor on the computer.
Never try and interpret your own results or your scans.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
So panic over it was. But he's not very technical, my dad. So.
What would be the treatment options then for somebody who biopsies found cancer? What would be the treatment options? I've talked about the Da Vinci machine. Robotic surgery is incredible, but there's loads of other options, aren't there?
Well, if a man is found to have prostate cancer contained within the prostate, so we call that localized disease, then generally the gold standard treatment options would either be surgery, you've mentioned in the form of robotic, but sometimes open surgery is still done. Open surgery is where there's just one incision. Yeah. Robotic surgery is normally keyhole, where 5 small incisions are made, and that enables the man to be up and about earlier. It's still major surgery, but up and about earlier, less blood loss, but isn't known to be superior to an open approach. But surgery, so that's surgical removal of the prostate, or another sort of typical treatment would be radiotherapy, often with hormone therapy, and the hormone therapy would be duration would be indicated by how at risk that man is of spread of that prostate cancer. So they would be the normal treatments that would be I would expect men to be offered with localized disease. Prostate cancer that's just breached the outer covering of the prostate, called locally advanced prostate cancer, those treatments will probably be quite similar, with some men, if they've had a little bit further progression, maybe only being able to consider radiotherapy and hormone therapy. And it's important to say that although, prostate cancer treatments can be very, very successful, they can result in significant side effects in many men. And that's why it's so important that we find a screening program that doesn't overdiagnose. We don't need to find men who have what we call low risk disease, low risk of spreading. We need to find those men who have aggressive disease who are at much greater risk.
Would Prostate Cancer UK like to have a full-on screening programme?
Absolutely, but it's got to be right. As I've mentioned, the PSA blood test is there's no universal agreement as to whether it should or could be used as a national screening programme. And the UK National Screening Committee, who decide which cancers we screen for, they reviewed the evidence back in 2020 and felt at that time that the PSA was not suitable, that they felt that too many men would be diagnosed with low-risk disease, and some of those men would absolutely insist on having treatment and go through unnecessary, quite invasive tests. You only want to have a biopsy of your prostate if you really do need it, that, if your likelihood of having prostate cancer that could do you harm is likely to be present. So in order to understand once and for all what tests should be used for a national screening programme, we are launching a hugely ambitious trial, which we are going to start recruiting for early in 2025. It's called the Transform trial. It is the largest prostate screening study for 20 years, and certainly the largest in the UK. And we are using some of the brightest minds amongst these speciality areas, and also sort of drawing from global experts as well. You know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And we also being very much supported by the UK Screening Committee. So what we aim to do here, and it's in the 3 phases, is we aim to have that evidence base to understand what tests would be most appropriate in relation to be able to find prostate cancer that's fast growing early. And obviously the PSA would always be used, but it's quite exciting from the point of view that we'd be able to look at novel tests as well to see what diagnostic tests would be best, which will cause the least amounts of harm but be the most effective and also be cost effective. Men won't be able to join themselves. It will be men will be recruited from participating GP surgeries, which will be very specifically chosen according to where they are in the UK. So it's very, very exciting. It's a 42 million. Absolutely.
It sounds incredible,
It's going to take time, unfortunately, because you can imagine if you need to see the outcomes of when men have had sort of certain investigations or tests, the outcomes of whether they diagnose a prostate cancer or whether they develop prostate cancer. So overall, it's going to take 16 years, and that's why we have to have interim plans, in place to continue to raise awareness, and also to make sure that men are aware if they're in a high-risk group. But we're hoping that the evidence from the Transform trial will give this information once and for all to be able to roll out a national screening programme.
Fantastic.
Were you involved in the House of Commons event, was it last week, with prostate cancer research?
Yeah, my colleague was, yeah.
And our Chief Medical Officer, Angela Wong, who, Steve, you've known from previous podcasts, she was there. And they had, again, a lot of celebrities getting behind the cause as well. So there was Gary Lineker, Frank Lampard, James Corden was there. Yeah. And Angela had a photo taken with them. And we shared that via our social media platforms, and it's one of our most viewed posts. Wow. I think on LinkedIn alone, we had over 15,000 views of that particular post.
So what was that event?
So it was Prostate Cancer Research were releasing a report into prostate cancer screening and early diagnosis. So it's all about trying to improve early diagnosis of prostate cancer. But it's great to see these celebs getting behind the cause because... as you mentioned with Sir Chris Hoy, it has such a huge impact. People start taking note. I wonder if I noticed on Sky Sports a few years ago, all the presenters were wearing the Prostate Cancer UK badge.
Yes.
And
we're lucky to have their support.
Raising awareness, and we've certainly noticed a difference. We do a lot of face-to-face engagement, and we're doing more and more because that's a way of us reaching directly to our population and going out and speaking to our communities. And recent events over this year, we've had many more men coming forward to talk to us, particularly about prostate cancer. So we have all of our information leaflets around different types of cancer and around signs and symptoms and treatment. But prostate cancer is one of the biggest ones we now get asked for. So it's changing. I think all the great work you guys are doing at Prostate Cancer UK to raise awareness, it's having an impact. And
that was the last question I was actually going to ask, because I wanted to know, if we go back 10 years and then if we look forward 10 years, how far have we come and what more is there still to do in terms of awareness, in terms of treatment, screening we've already talked about?
Unfortunately, we've got a lot more to do.
Yeah.
And I think how this is evidenced is that, unfortunately, every year in the UK, around 12,000 men will die as a direct result of their prostate cancer. And we also know that around 10,000 men every year in the UK will be diagnosed with prostate cancer too late to be able to treat with the aim of cure. So I think those figures in itself show that we've got an awful lot more work to do. We need to understand more about the biology of prostate cancer. And this goes right across the whole range of concerns. in relation to finding better ways of diagnosing, trying to work towards having a national screening programme, to find better treatments, to providing better support going forward for those living with and beyond the disease of treatment.
Loads of work for you to do then, Paul, on the comms and engagement front.
Definitely.
Particularly, like we said at the start, with your very diverse population here, loads of work to do. I imagine lots of projects in your head.
Lots of projects, lots more work, as you say, but starting to see some results as well. I don't know if you remember the previous podcast with Joe Appiah, British athlete, raising awareness of prostate cancer amongst the black community. And we did a video with Joe and he got some great footage of him training in the park with colleagues, and also then going into barbershops and talking there about it as well. And Joe himself, he had prostate cancer and recovered. And I love that line in the podcast where he says he had prostate cancer, but he recovered and went on to break a world record.
Yeah, he said, I came back to break a world record.
Fantastic.
Yeah. But his big message was talking, wasn't it? Like his big thing was talking about it, because his family hadn't really talked about it. It was only a sort of chance conversation with a fellow athlete, wasn't it? A friend who sort of urged Joe to go and get tested. Then it all kind of went on.
That's often the way. That's often the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're very much aware that when you're raising awareness in the black communities, that a different approach is often required to how you might raise awareness within a white cohort. So this is why we've done several things, because we realise that more absolutely needs to be done, as you say. So one of the things is we have a new department where we have a fantastic team who are specifically employed to engage with black communities. We have an associate director who actually, his role is to actually put a strategy in place, to develop a strategy and to roll this out to reduce black health inequalities. I'm very much personally, both professionally and personally invested, because I have a mixed heritage of Afro-Caribbean background as well. And I go anywhere and speak anywhere if any opportunity allows, to specifically in the black communities. I'm working an event in Camden on Saturday, which is a Black Men's Health Advisory Group. And we also have a fantastic active Black Men's Health Advisory Group, which was set up early last year. And this enables us to be more culturally sensitive, to get feedback on our campaigns, to make sure that, we are encouraging trust and developing relationships. And as you say, unfortunately, within our black communities, it's quite common that it isn't necessarily shared openly. When there's been a diagnosis, you'll often find that sons would be unaware that their father or their grandfather had a prostate cancer diagnosis. So it's about trying to overcome these type of obstacles to sharing information to enable individuals to make good health choices.
You need really good role models, don't you? Guys like Joe. And I think we spoke to a guy, I remember a few years ago on our BBC podcast called Errol McKellar, I think.
Yes, I know Errol.
Errol, actually, yeah.
Errol
saw him last week.
Everyone knows Errol, don't
Absolutely,
they? Because
absolutely.
he was diagnosed, I think, maybe 2010-ish, and I think he's not stopped talking since.
No, he's great.
He wants to tell everybody
absolutely
about the risks.
He runs
Yes.
a garage, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He's
When
a
people go
mechanic,
in and take their car in,
That's
he then
right.
starts having a conversation.
He's
Yeah,
absolutely incredible.
He used to give free OATs to people that got a PSA blood test. Absolutely. And it's working with the communities. There are significant problems in relation to the fact that we very much underrepresented in relation to research in individuals who have black heritage. It's predominantly research evidence which is looking at white Europeans. So again, it's about building that trust to encourage members of these communities who very, very much are at this increased risk to start to feel more comfortable and to gain that trust so we can gain this evidence. Because at the moment, we don't know very much, except for the fact there's this increased risk. But we don't really understand whether screening individuals who are of black heritage could actually be something that should already be being adopted now. Yeah. So there's a lot of lack of knowledge. So and there's understandably a lot of mistrust, from historic things that have happened in medicine. We've got a lot to overcome, but I feel that these relationships, and we call them life-saving conversations, are something that we're trying to overcome, these myths and these barriers.
Well, hopefully anybody listening to this will feel a lot more informed. I certainly do. Thank you so much, Susan, for coming on and inspiring us and educating us. And Paul, thank you for your input on your podcast debut. How did you find it?
Good, thanks. Yeah, it's really great to have Susan here and talking through it. It's amazing. I think there's a lot more work we can do with Prostate
Loads more work.
Absolutely.
Some of the projects you've got coming forward are really, really exciting. So, yeah, I think we've got a great year ahead next year, and lots of work, lots to be done, like you say, but lots of opportunities to really make a difference.
Yep, absolutely. We can't do this alone, and working with, the cancer alliances and other NHS bodies and NHS colleagues is absolutely instrumental to this. So it's not just the public, it's also us as sort of health body sort of responsibilities for improving health. I would be delighted.
What a lovely joined up way to end, eh? Thank you so much, Susan, and Paul as well. Thank you.
Thank you so
Steve.
much. Thank you.